Okay, so what's driving today's conversation? Why are we here? Everything has exploded really in the last few years, and organizations have focused really, as far as I can see, on rolling out AI tools and running pilots. You see that constantly, you see that everywhere. Every single LinkedIn message that you can possibly imagine is showing that up in real time. And I would say that many have seen pockets of success, but are still probably seeing a disconnect between what I would say is experimentation and then, of course, the real business impact. And so you hear a lot of news about that. What is the real business impact and where is it coming? And one of the things that we're going to talk about today is the question isn't necessarily whether AI works, but rather how are organizations redesigning work around AI? I'll repeat that. How are organizations redesigning work around AI? And that's really a topic that we're going to dig into today. It's something that's a little bit more nuanced and it's separate from the discussions that you're seeing in AI broadly. And we thought we'd spend some time talking about that. So today we're going to explore what changes really when AI becomes embedded into real work, once it's in the work. And how do we avoid common adoption pitfalls with any brand new technology release, but specifically AI? And what do we need to do? What do we need leaders to do to move beyond what we're seeing as experimentation towards a real measurable business impact? And that's such an important aspect. And so that's what we're going to spend a little time on today. I appreciate the opportunity to have you with us, and we're going to go ahead and keep on going. So I am joined by three friends today, and I'll introduce them in a second. I am Aaron Deneau. As I said, I'm a principal consultant with Tier 1 Performance, and I'm just really excited to be here with Harrison, Emmanuel, and Jen. So first up, we have Harrison. Harrison's work, among many other aspects, I will say, centers around organizational design, operating models, workforce transformation, really helping organizations think through restructuring of roles and what kind of decision makings needs to evolve as business needs evolve. And that's in addition to all kinds of other cool things he does outside of Tier 1. Next, we have my friend Emmanuel here as well. Emmanuel does a little bit of everything. He runs our Center of Excellence here at Tier 1. He focuses on, again, among many other things, really the behavior change and AI enablement aspect. And so, specifically, what that actually does to drive adoption and how do we create lasting behavior shifts, you could say, rather than just a one-time event, which is something that we're trying to avoid here. And so, Emmanuel's going to be able to give us some really good perspective as we step through today. And finally, also my friend Jen, who we got a chance to work with from Ashland, one of the clients we've worked with. She's awesome, and we're just super excited to have her here with us. She has spent her career leading organizational effectiveness, communication, and workforce transformation efforts. And that all includes aligning talent, leadership, business strategy. How do you help prepare organizations for what we're talking about today, which is the future of work? So she's going to bring a real practical inside the org perspective to today's conversation. So just thank you, all three of you, for joining us here today. And let's just dive right in to our first slide. So one of the most important things that I want us to talk about and think about today is that most AI conversations really focus on tools and models and training and how do we get access to that. Those things are really important and they matter. Don't get me wrong. But what we're talking about more today is that this idea that organizations really need technology and governance and employees who actually know how to use the AI tools. But what we're seeing is across client organizations is that none of those elements alone drive transformation. None of them. And that's because we know from firsthand experience, AI isn't just forcing orgs to refresh their tech stacks. It's way more than that. It really requires teams to change how they work. And that's what we're being faced with across the board right now. And so modern workplaces are certainly increasingly using AI, as you see in the news and everywhere you go, to execute workflows, make recommendations, and even make decisions, maybe within like a defined boundary. But that's also placing immense pressure, right, on leaders to help redesign work and roles and accountability. And that's what I want to talk about today. And Harrison, I'd love to get your perspective on this and how you think about this.
Yeah, certainly, Aaron, and thanks for having me today. And nice to see all my clients, current and former, in the participant list, as well as some of my LinkedIn followers. Yeah, to add on to that, Aaron, yeah, it's like we've treated technology in the recent past like it's a shovel. And it's a tool that we use to get things done. And even in the early days of AI here, we think of AI as a tool that we can use to get something done faster. But now it's time to start evolving that thinking and having it do things for us, and us defining what our level of participation is. So, instead of like, give me the shovel so I can dig a hole, hey, AI, take this shovel and go dig this hole. Um, but then we have to say, but watch out for the gas line, and we're not quite there yet. So there's still some real decisions that we need to make about what we allow AI to do, what we insist on AI to do, and what our roles become if we've outsourced some of our tasks to AI. And in a lot of cases, we're going to have to make real structural change in our operations to define what the new job is if it's not doing those tasks.
Yeah, I totally get that. I'm curious, Jen, on your thoughts on how you think about this with your own work.
Yeah, absolutely. And agree with what Harrison said. And I think that's a really good analogy. If we think about when Excel, and I know we're all too young to remember this, but if we think about when that was introduced, it changed the way accountants worked, right? But it was one tool where we have something now that's continuously evolving and changing and shifting. And so it is much bigger of a transformation than just an introduction of a new tool, like Harrison said. So couldn't agree more.
Emmanuel, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, just to piggyback, it's interesting because a lot of that work is changing in pockets and organizations, but the
Mm.
real head scratcher is how to get that to scale across, the broader organization. And of course, there's some gates to clear in doing that. Maybe we'll talk about some of that later.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we think about those things that we need to clear, it's evident the pressure to redesign is definitely real. But again, I don't believe that most organizations are stuck in a cycle that keeps them from getting there. And so I'd love to dig in a little bit more on this. And so let's shift and talk a little bit about a pattern that we, and Emmanuel, you know this, that, and I'm going to call on here in a second, that we consistently see. And it's normal. Again, this is normal for any tech rollout, but this is just transformationally a different world we're living in right now with AI. And so organizations, they're introduced to AI, employees receive, access and training, and some people adopt quickly, others don't. But underneath all of that, the work itself often remains unchanged, and that's what we're seeing currently. And Emmanuel, I just like, as you think about that, what do you think is contributing to this pattern?
Yeah, so there's a few things, Aaron. So one, adoption is not the goal. It's not the ultimate goal. It's a bridge. It's an important step. Um, but I see some organizations looking at adoption as the end state. It's an early measure. And so it'll tell you use, it'll tell you who's using it, it'll tell you frequency, but it won't tell you the quality of that use.
Mm.
And that's where, some of the things that we're going to talk about, like upskilling and redesigning the work, so that there's a need for proficiency in order to move into the quality of use, which gets everyone to what they're really looking for, which is the ROI. And so positioning that, though, we have to understand where we were already going before AI became a thing. We were heading somewhere. We had a product or service or something that we were heading towards, a North Star strategy. And in that, we could walk that back to find our measure, to define our ROI, and understand the quality that people are engaging, within your organization. I use the joke, my mom's using AI and I'm using AI. We are not doing the same thing, but we're both using AI, so we want to move beyond that. And I think the other thing is that you can have adoption, but your culture matters. So years ago, LXPs came out, and people deployed them, people got into them, but if you didn't have a culture of learning, Viva Engage, that comes out. If your organization is low
Hmm.
on, sharing or doesn't have high trust, people, they'll get in there, but you're not going to get the ROI, you're not going to get the outcome that you're seeking. And so those are just some of the things that I see where folks get jammed up and forward.
Appreciate that. Jen, as you think about this, how do you bucket this in your mind about these ideas around, what with any tool and AI in particular, how adoption does fall short?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I've seen is a lot of people just get discouraged, especially after initial, training. Well, I went in and I tried to do my work the way I do my work, and it didn't happen the way I wanted to. So I'm going back to the way that I've always done it. So I do think the expectations that are set in terms of how we use it, how we really embed it into our way of working, what expectations are set from leadership and but I really like what Emmanuel said too. I think it's very much about the culture because if you do have a culture of experimentation and openness
Hmm.
and innovation, that it does help you to continue to approach this with an open mind. Don't give up on it so quickly. But it's hard to keep because you do have to keep training people too. With
Hmm.
it continuing to evolve and new things coming out every day. I mean, the way I use it today is very different than the way I used it 3 months ago. And that's because it's a better tool today. So, yeah, there's lots of challenges when we talk about training and adoption. But you're right, this isn't the end goal, and it doesn't help us to answer the question on ROI at all.
Yeah. Harrison, as we kind of shift in a moment to talking about how the work needs to potentially be changed, and that we're not just layering AI onto unchanged work, and getting really intentional about the work itself and talking about that framework. Any thoughts about adoption here and pitfalls?
Well, first, there's a distinct difference between adoption and adaption.
Okay.
Adoption means you accept it, you see its value, it links more to sentiment than actual use. It's not until we adapt to using it consistently that it has an effect on our lives. And really,
Hmm.
when we talk about corporate operations, that links back to expectations. I
Yeah.
recently had a company come out and say, well, we expect everyone to use AI. Well, for what?
Yeah.
And we're at the point where that expectation has to be clear and it has to link to what that person's job is. And then we
Yeah.
can answer that question. And then we can get to adaption beyond adoption.
I appreciate that. Adaptability is such an important aspect to any work and the way that we're thinking about this. I do want to shift though and really kind of dig into this reclassification across work and it's kind of an idea that's central to a part of what we're talking about here today. And so I really want to just shift here to make this really practical. Here's a simple framework that we've been using to think about how do we reclassify work in the age of AI. All right. So every activity in an organization can be viewed through one of these three lenses. All right. Is the way we're kind of thinking about this. So what are things that can be automatable? What are things that can become hybrid? And what's really human critical? So Harrison, like what's powerful about this framework and how we can think about it?
Well, I think it's fairly self-explanatory, but if I can just shift the lens on it a little bit, we're really focused on skills these days,
Mhm.
right? And we look at jobs and job families in terms of what skills they have to do. Well, there are two kinds of skills that we look at. There are skills that are linked to expertise, and there are skills that are linked to actions or the ability to perform tasks. Um, as we move forward, increasingly, the ability to do a task is not going to be really all that valuable.
Mm.
So that's always going to be an opportunity to automate that task. Um, when there is a task linked to judgment, um, having somebody evaluate something, against something else in a qualitative way, not a quantitative way. That is going to be more of a hybrid task. And when it really comes down to the deep philosophical conversations, um, the conversations I have with Claude when I'm on my long car trips, those are human centric, human critical. It doesn't mean that AI doesn't have a part in it, but ideation, um, and new ideas, because AI just works on what it already knows and what it's already heard. It still needs humans to really kind of twist those perspectives and make them really human centric.
I appreciate that. And let's go ahead and dig in a little bit deeper into each of these categories and call in Emmanuel and Jen as well. But let's kind of like let's approach this from a little bit of a deeper dive in what really makes up those things that can be automated. This is where the rubber hits the road, and it has been because we have seen firsthand a threat and it's very much related to these things that are kind of just very quickly are now becoming automatable, transcribing notes, and there's a thousand things that are in this category. But Harrison, help us think a little bit deeper about this first section here, those things that machines are leading in and probably will take this whole area.
Yeah, I'm really tempted to bring back my shovel analogy, except for the fact that anyone who's ever dug a ditch knows that's some of the hardest work, known to man, actually digging. So I'm going to move away from that. But I think the people who, deserve to be afraid are people who define themselves based on their ability to perform a task. And that's something that's, repeatable, that happens on a schedule. Anything that is on your calendar that's a reminder to do something by a certain time, or, contained within a to-do list. Those are things that are, absolutely ripe for automation. Um, and it creates a shift then. It doesn't mean you're not involved anymore
Mm.
with that task, but your role within that task changes differently. In some cases it's going to be building the automation itself, but in other cases you're going to have to shift your thinking to being analytical about what the result of that task is. And that could be, checking for correctness, verifying sources, interpreting applicability to a current situation. But it's a shift, and it's a shift that changes the skills makeup of that
Mm.
job.
Yeah, Jen, I'm curious on your thoughts on this and how you view this aspect.
Yeah, somebody said to me, I think it was yesterday or the day before, what we want to do, and what I think it falls under this, is take the robot out of the human. And that picture really, really resonated with me. And so yeah, we want to take the robot out of the human. I think this is also something we've been doing for quite some time with
Mhm.
RPA and other tools and technology that have been introduced. So hopefully this isn't the part that feels hard. There's still work to be done, right? We still have to help people refocus that time or retrain, which is what we've done around RPI, is shift the focus, retrain them for that analytical view, so that they feel like there's still a purpose. There's still, right, their meaningfulness in their work. It's not the task itself. But it is challenging to move the organization in that direction, especially if RPA is not already embedded or that mindset isn't already there. But that robot out of the human, I really liked the way that somebody just said that to me yesterday. So it's a challenge, but I think this is one of the areas where we should be pretty good at it from an HR perspective.
Yeah.
I
Emmanuel,
love that.
yeah, I do too. I do too. I appreciate that thinking. And also like Emmanuel, as you see, like you're right on the ground and you see these aspects and you're the one that's helping create the technology around the AI that can make this things automatable right away. And so I'm curious,
Yeah.
before we move on to the next category, what you think about this.
Yeah, I absolutely. And just to echo what Jen just shared, we've had some semblance of automation for quite some time.
Hmm.
Of course, now it's able to do more dynamic things and do a little bit more heavy lifting, and integrate into our processes differently. But I like to think of the question I love is that, what work is human worthy? Asking that, and how do we move our folks? We've got great people, and so not necessarily replacement. How do we move them to doing the top of license work, the top of their capacity and their abilities, and remove some of these other things? And when you think about that, the human experience still matters to automation, because when you have a workforce of humans that are following the proper behaviors to engage with proper process to create proper data, and
Hmm.
then it can land and we can have a good, AI or agentic experience or automation experience. If we've got, said the good kids get rewarded right now. Everyone who had their rooms cleaned, who had, good data hygiene, they can just jump in and just, get that value more immediate than some of us who have to do more cleanup and readiness work. So
No, I appreciate that thought. And also like I think this is like really where trust becomes super critical because people need the confidence that the system is reliable and clarity and that there's leadership expects a new behavior and that's kind of an idea here in this automation. But I do want to move on to, so that's category one. I do want to move on to category two, which is where really the day-to-day complexity lives in hybrid work. And so you know, hybrid work is where I believe many orgs are going to spend most of their time over the next several months, years. And Emmanuel, I want to stay with you here. Can you speak to this category and about this touch of human and AI and how this plays out in category two?
yeah, absolutely. And I think this is the one that, touches, just about everyone. Sometimes the automation is, IT or, InfoSec or, some other pockets that are really steering the ship on that one. But this is one that, applies to all. And, when I think about this, these questions here, this is, everyone has, some responsibility here. Just to think about a little bit where Harrison was heading earlier, he was talking about skills, but and I'm going to distill this down a little bit. But when we think about, people in your workforce, they have roles, and those roles have responsibilities, and then within those responsibilities are tasks. And some of those tasks are going to go away, to the robots, so to speak. Some of these things are now we're going to see approximate roles maybe start to collapse into a singular role. And so then we have to think about, what is our talent distribution and what are the impacts there. And so when we think about, these hybrid activities, and we're going through this ourselves. We actually, a global shipping and logistics client of ours, we work with them because this isn't happening in isolation. Everyone's talking about AI, but you still have your outcomes, you still have your other platforms, you have your productivity suite, you're getting things from and bringing it to AI and getting AI out of, and taking it back to. And so, we've worked through experiences where the folks that are performing the work, we're partnering with them to help redefine the work, to figure out how to deconstruct and reassemble the roles, around, this new future, this now future, if you will, however you want to say it. But we're doing it in partnership with the folks that are doing it. One, so that we're making meaningful change and we're not just slapping on hot gluing a jetpack of AI onto something that already exists. But then it also touches some of those human components of trust and folks being involved in the shift that is happening to them. And so, as it pertains to knowledge work, I think this is the one that really is going to, lead into, productivity and, how organizations move forward. And again, tapping back on some of that ROI that folks are looking for. This is also the one where sometimes it vanishes, where, it returns to the individual and hasn't yet broadly been making its way back to the organization. So. Hold your
I get
breath for those
that.
4-day work weeks. Might
And
not
Jen, how do you
happen.
see
Might not happen.
it's true. Jen, in your role, how do you see this showing up, this hybrid category? And I do see a question in the chat as well. Thank you, Harrison, for answering that as well. Yeah, Jen, how do you see this showing up, this second category of hybrid activities and where the future of work may be going in this direction?
Yeah. And this is part of I think what gets me really really excited about at least where we are in our journey. I'd say we're right at this point. And what we're finding is there's a couple of things that really impact our effectiveness, I think, in this area. And one is sentiment. And I think Emmanuel or
Mm,
Harrison said it earlier. And so there is a, part of the organization that is fully on board with usage, is promoting it, is expecting their teams to
hmm
use it. But there's also a sentiment that, and I wouldn't say it's just our organization, it's also in the world. I think I heard one of the new kind of teenager isms is, oh, well, that's AI, meaning it's fake, meaning it's not real, meaning it's not you, it's not authentic. And so there's that sentiment, I think, that's still in the organization that I think we need to apply this type of thinking to it so we make sure it does still feel like us, sound like us, produce like us. And then the second component, I think, is it's easy to look at this and think, well, I lose my knowledge, I lose my expertise when I'm partnering with AI in a particular way. And I'll say I even felt that at first too. I like to write. My leader came to me to write things with her or for her, and all of a sudden she didn't have to anymore. And so I'm like, wait, but I liked that part of my job. And so it took me a little bit of time to get over that and realize it is because of my experience and knowledge and the input that I can give AI that really creates the best hybrid outputs that prevents kind of the work slop that we hear about. And so I worry sometimes about early career employees and not having some of that experience, but I do think it's really important to emphasize how critical it is that we are leveraging the knowledge that our employees do have, the experience they have to make this partnership really work.
I love how you're leading with the people and the personal experience. I totally agree and concur with that. Thank you, Mark, for your question in the chat. Real quick on that one, I do believe that augmentation is often where people start because the AI is definitely making you better at what you already do. But I think augmentation without, again, as we think about intentional design here, is just doing the same work, but potentially just faster. So I believe potentially that a real shift could happen when you ask whether that work should be redesigned entirely. And so that's kind of the part of the thinking around that, and that's how I would approach that. So, but thank you for the question. I do want to go into the our third category here, and this is the people side, and Jen was articulating that a second ago, and that is essentially the final category is the human critical work. And Emmanuel, I am going to throw it back to you. And as a technologist and someone who's runs our Center of Excellence for AI and is deeply technically expert, you are always the first to mention the human critical aspects of work. And so I would love to hear your thoughts on this third category as we break them down.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's not a slide for it, but this is approximate to part of my life, which is governance. Behave, everyone. So yeah, I mean, this is and Jen, thanks for that. All of that resonates really well with me, what you just shared. But yeah, these things that we can't really pass off. And I know some of these items, some folks may argue that some of the current systems might be able to participate in some of this. But back to what I shared earlier, where there's roles, responsibilities, and tasks. Those roles are still homeowners' responsibilities. And so, there's still, you're still responsible and accountable for, what goes out the door. When we think about, could we use AI? And then there's, of course, the should we. So when I hear stories about, end-to-end onboarding, me personally, I don't know that I would want to go through, as a new hire, a non-human, fully agentic onboarding experience. Or sensitive messaging. We were talking earlier today about digital twins and how I can do a video where it's really not me and my audio. I don't know if I really want specific messaging going out to the organization. As me as a C-suite leader, that's completely it's not authentic. It's not me. I think there's something that matters there, for folks. And understanding, some of the things that aren't here, some understanding when, bias, really any bias, there's data bias, having and this touches on something that Jen mentioned, the expertise and understanding quality. Because AI is now a thing, there's so many people that is more pressure to do things faster. And so sometimes people's judgment isn't there. Sometimes the quality or that lens isn't dialed in because it looks good enough, and your brain can't almost see the inconsistencies. And so like when I'm generating something that is maybe like some slides or something like that, I still want to get it in front of my creative experts because they can see the white space or around the corners, little things that I might miss that look good to me where it matters. Same thing for any writing. I know Jen, you see you like to write. I'd love to have yeah, do your QC bot, but then also have a human check into it. And
Yeah.
so there's just certain things that we cannot abdicate and hand off, to AI, and we have to stay. I heard human in the loop's been said a lot. I heard one gentleman say human at the helm. So
Mm.
Human at the helm. Well, I'm curious, Jen, from your leadership perspective, you know, what's the cost of leaving human critical ownership undefined, even for a short period?
Yeah. Well, with how we're using AI so significantly through really critical, functions. And again, I'm not just talking about my organization. You read stories about,
Hmm.
if we use it in legal, you still have to have, right, that legal perspective, the expertise and that perspective, looking at it. If I think about some of the, my good mentors that I've had throughout my career, what they did was make sure I shifted my perspective. It wasn't necessarily the content that I learned, right? It was shifting my perspective. And I think that's what we need to get to, and even leaders need to get to in order to really drive some of again, the right behaviors and the right accountability. Um, but yeah, that's what I think you need most of is setting those expectations, making sure that it's really, really clear who owns what, and making sure that there is an expectation that you are still accountable and you own everything that you produce.
Yeah, you certainly do own everything you produce, and I love also the comment in the chat here. Something Daniel Pink, who I respect, said in recent commencement address. It said, Greg says here, AI doesn't have any taste. I love that, and I think that Dan Pink put a finger on something that's really important for this conversation. And some would argue that it does have taste, but I think that we're showing that the human element is a big part here. It doesn't have the values that we carry in and all the experiences that we carry into every single thing we do and how that shapes our decisions at the right moment and the right time for what we're working on. And it doesn't have the relationships or the accountability to the people in the room. And I totally get that. I want to stay on this slide for a second because I think this is a really important one. So, Harrison, what happens when someone says the AI suggested it, and it's like,
But it's immediate and irrevocable loss of trust, which is
mm,
the cornerstone of getting anything done. And the biggest danger of over reliance on AI right now is, loss of credibility. And if, you just said AI did it and I wasn't accountable for discernment, that reflects poorly not on the AI because everyone knows what the AI can and can't do, but your abilities to uh, discern and own either the incorrectness or the correction of it.
yeah. No, I totally get that. And I also I think that there's some recent studies at Carnegie Mellon that talked about atrophy, brain atrophy,
Mm.
and where we're just going and we're not necessarily using our brains anymore. And how do we start thinking about it? And I just want to emphasize that this human critical activities is the third category that we're mentioning here because this is such a huge aspect of it. And as a people oriented performance organization at Tier 1, we solely believe that this is a main aspect and certainly in a critical category as we think about redesigning work and how that is. So I appreciate the opportunity to just kind of go over how we think about reclassifying honestly the work across those three categories. And what comes out of that is an org structure conversation becomes unavoidable. And so that's kind of what we're getting at with part of this discussion as well. So I do want to shift gears though, um, and 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 talk about the evolution of organizational structure. So if we think about this, if work changes, organizations must change as well. And Harrison, can you help us think through that and share why the org design is becoming such or will become a critical conversation in AI transformation, and how do we think about that?
Well, it becomes critical because, we can't end up at the end of the day, eliminating all people because of a mistaken belief that AI can do that, can do it consistently and do it, in all situations. But it also has to come with the recognition that jobs are shifting. Um, and I think roles have always been activity portfolios to a certain extent, but the way we refer to them is different. I alluded earlier to the new way of thinking is thinking in terms of skills, and that, there are skills that have different values to the organization, and skills that are linked to tasks having lower value, and skills that are linked to the ability to learn knowledge or expertise as having, a higher order of value.
Hmm.
And when we look across the spectrum of a collection of skills, um, we want to shift away from those low value activities to the higher return activities, right? The things like we've been mentioning here that are, hybrid and human centric, discernment, relationship based. So if we think about, a job description 10 years ago where it, just had a bulleted list of tasks that this role is expected to complete. Well, we're going to see that shift to not be necessarily the tasks that need to be done, but the discernment and judgment that's to be expected based on the skills that that role has. And they did it. And that's how we get these decision rights to be explicit. It's the job description of the future is that you have the ability to smell when something's off and to push the AI when the AI needs to be pushed, and to disregard things sometimes that should be disregardable. But AI becomes the norm and the expectation in that. There's, an assumption in that decision, right, that it's being applied, in an AI centric world. And so, the work still needs to be done, but we want the most human version of that job to emerge. I don't want somebody to spend, a whole bunch of time trying to figure out how to do a pivot table. An employee's ability to do a pivot table is not important to me. What's important to me is what's the data that's coming out of that, and what does that data mean to the business, and being able to, outsource that, create the expectation, um, that discernment and that expertise is going to be applied is what's actually going to move businesses forward. But those things can't just happen in a vacuum. They don't
Yeah.
just change because they can change. We actually have to initiate and start those organizational structural changes and say, this job is expected to use AI in this way. I expect you to take that output, validate it, add your expertise to it, and thus produce this outcome out of this job.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And as we and Jen, I really want to come to here for you for a second. Eh, As we think about evolving organizational structures in your career at many different places, I know, and we've talked about this before in other places that you've been, and just across your career, you've watched organizational restructure through multiple waves of change,
Mm-hmm.
and not just AI,
Mm-hmm.
but digital transformation, remote work, all of it, you know? And so I guess I want to ask you, what's different this time when it comes to how roles and decision rights are seeming to evolve and or need to evolve?
Yeah, it's really I think it's really really interesting. The conversation is very different. I think at the core, it's all the good change management principles that we all
Hmm.
know, right? So we're still applying all of those things. What I think is more important, at least as we're on this journey, is the peer connection, the network connection, the learning from each other. I think is really different and important. Where in previous, it could be very finite in terms of your role and changes just to you. This is different. This is a much bigger, broader transformation that we're trying to do. And it will impact every single role in the organization, not just a particular group or a particular type of role. So I think that's what makes it very, very different. And as we've been talking about, it does shift how each of us work, or it should, right? What I will say, and I'd be curious to what the panel thinks or would say to this as well as the audience. But one of the things I have found for myself, and I think this is also a shift that, kind of a qualitative shift that we can watch happen in an organization, is I still feel like at times I have to admit and disclose I used Copilot for this, or I used AI for this, or it was AI generated, but then I edited it. So I even did it last night in parentheses. It was them, but I did it, right? I still added to it. When we get to the point where it doesn't feel like we have to disclose that information and it is just how we work, I think is going to be a good indicator that we're moving in the right direction. But I also think the conversations that we're having about how to apply AI are very different. Because I think in the past too, we would start with the tool, right? We wouldn't start with, well, how do you work? We're starting with the tool. And I think today, at least where we're headed, is doing some deep dives in our organization. We don't want to talk about Copilot. We don't want to talk about AI. I just want you to talk to me about how you work. Let's figure out the processes, the pain points, the issues, the challenges. Then we're going to explore and brainstorm how we can apply this tool on it, which fundamentally then just changes the way you work. So I know that was a lot, Aaron, but those are
No.
those are a few thoughts I had.
I like the simplicity. Let's just talk about how you work, and I get that, and I appreciate that. I do want to I want to make sure I hear from Emmanuel on this because as we think about org structure and decision rights and one thing on paper, but as I well know, you work on the human side of this. So when an organization redesigns roles or accountability, what actually has to change in your mind to make the behavior day to day stick? Like, what is it?
Yeah, you have to, for start, I mean, we talked about this earlier. So you have to engage with the people. You can't just like have this happen to them. I know there's a lot of folks around talking about top down, bottom up. So there needs to be more bottom up, as it
Yeah.
pertains to, AI in organizations. And, there's a lot of nice publications. There's a lot of nice theorists. Um, you know, you have an organization in motion, you have a technology that is in motion. You have people, that you can't do, click by click training. It's more experiential. It needs to be mapped to what they're doing. It needs to persist and be ongoing. Um, and so there are quite a few things that you have to hinge together, as you move through this change. And so that's why I'm excited that we get to work with our change management partners, because that's the crux of this. The technology is, dare I say it, almost secondary. There's the care and change management aspects for the humans, and then
Mhm.
like I wanted to just high five Jen. I'm looking for my high five button because it's like, what are you, as a technologist, I've been asking the same question for almost 30 years. What are you trying to do? Hey, I want a website. Why? I don't know. I just want one. That's what people are doing now. Why? and there's not a good answer for it. What are you trying to do? Where are you trying to go? So thanks for that share, Jen. Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. And I do, in the interest of time, I want to bring us forward one more time. So, like, we've talked about reclassifying work, we've talked about redesigning roles, making accountability probably much more explicit. All of that is organizational, but I do believe the underneath every org chart in my mind is a person asking, what does this mean for me? And so let's go there next, and let's touch on that aspect here. And so really let's talk about in the time we have left the people side of this a little bit more. And Emmanuel, how do employees need to adapt? Like what really let's dig into this just a little bit more. So whenever the work changes, behavior must change. But what happens beyond that? What's the reality that folks are going to be facing here?
Yeah. And so I think the honest thing is to definitely engage with every employee. I think everyone knows now, but that there is a change that has to happen. There's upskilling that needs to take place. There's probably going to be change to their role, to the work that they do, to the client base that they serve, the world around them. And as we see with many of these technological shifts, it's going to fall into your personal life too. So you have to deal with it there. But one of the things that I like to call out is, it matters what leaders are saying, but it also matters what they're not saying.
Hmm.
And they're, people are people, and they'll fill in the blank space, and sometimes with things that wouldn't want them to fill in, and that can have impact to performance. And so, I think high trust organizations are having an easier time, moving forward with this transformation. We're asking very seasoned and experienced folks to do a very vulnerable thing. And this takes me back to my time in higher ed when, oh my gosh, Microsoft came out with the ribbon in Office. And I had some very experienced, experts in their domain, folks that have won millions of dollars of research, near tears because there was this shift coming to their
Hmm.
space. They said, I've been doing this for 30 some odd years. Why do I have to use this tablet, or why do I got to start doing it this way? And so it's helping people, through that shift. And uh, there's a lot that falls to leaders. One in partnering and staying close to their people, but then also doing their own upskilling so that they can appropriately lead through that shift. They can define strategy for that, and help their organizations exploit this opportunity, and capitalize on it appropriately.
Yeah, I understanding how to capitalize on it appropriately is like the main key here. So, Jen, like what's the question underneath the question? The thing employees aren't saying out loud, but absolutely need to know or answer right now. How are you thinking about this as we think about the human reality of this?
Well, I think we've been really lucky that our CEO is an advocate. And so, starting from the very top, there is an expectation, and he has said it on our town halls and publicly. He's using it. He wants to use it. He wants to learn it. So, he's setting the expectation from the top, which makes a huge difference that it's acceptable, it's okay to use. If our CEO can use it for his work, as well. So I do think that that makes a huge difference. But our leaders create the culture. They create the environment. They're responsible for the accountability of usage, the encouragement, the coaching of how to use it as well. And look, if you're seeing work slop as a leader, don't right, don't criticize. Let's talk about how to get it better. How do we shift it forward? Here's the questions I might ask, or and so there's just a lot of opportunity, I think, for leaders to play a pretty significant role. It's challenging. They've got a lot of other things on their plate too, but hopefully we can embed it as part of the expectation if you're a leader at an organization that is
Mhm.
promoting this tool, that the expectation is that you're comfortable with it, using it, and you know enough to be able to coach it too. So yeah, we're certainly seeing that, and seeing the teams that have leaders who are encouraging it and teams that aren't, in very different places around comfort. Even still questions around security and data privacy and
Mhm.
protection. And so there's still definitely two camps, I'd say. that we're seeing. And so, yeah, but we are lucky it's starting from the top. And I do think that's what it takes and setting the tone for the culture.
Culture, 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 certainly a big thing for us. Harrison, from an org design perspective, when you see leaders getting the human side wrong, like what does that cost them structurally?
Oh, it costs them everything. Because we still need humans to talk to our customers,
Mhm.
to, do the work, to produce the things, that we produce. And people buy things from us because they're buying from other people, not necessarily, purely a brand. And, if your people are alienated, your brand is absolutely damaged goods.
Yeah, we want to stay away from that. That's for sure. The pace that things are changing, the stakes are so high, and there are so many things that we're having to juggle as we're restructuring work. It's just a lot. And I hope that framework that we're mentioning today is helpful as we think about, the way we think about work and how it's changing, and definitely these three categories that will set up us for success is if we really define them and figure out what that means from us for today. So I do appreciate. I know we're running a little close to time, so I do want to make sure that I give a chance for our leaders here to give some higher level takeaways. We've got some listed on the screen here as well. But Jen, I'll start with you. It's just some general overall thoughts as we kind of wrap up here today and think about like what work lies ahead of us and how structure and roles are changing and the pace that things are changing and all of these things that we're faced with. How do you think about this?
Yeah. The good news is I think we're on the right path, right? So I think we're doing the right things. I think we know, again, I think I said it earlier, we know how to do this, but we have to pay attention to all the nuances that make this just a little bit different. And I think we've talked about a lot of those things today, right? Training is necessary. It opens up our minds. It gives us the tools to be able to use AI. It's really, really important. The peer network, the change network is
Mhm.
critical for this, for true adoption and adaption. I like that. I like that ad, Harrison. But I do think we're going to learn so much from each other that we're not going to learn on our own. So I do think that that's really, really critical. And then, like we just said, our leaders just play such a critical role in accountability and setting the tone and the culture. But they are a really key unlock as part of our adoption journey for this as well. So yeah,
Thank
but alignment is really important around all of that.
Yeah, certainly being aligned around a number of things and at the same time competing priorities.
Mhm.
There are other things happening in our worlds and our work
Correct.
worlds outside of AI.
Yeah.
And we find ourselves just thinking about that a lot recently. Emmanuel, over to you on some of the key takeaways as we think through what we talked about today.
Yeah. So just real fast, again, deconstructing and reconstructing, repatterning the work, um, making sure that we're focusing and doing it in partnership with the people and design. When I think about, what's been durable with all the rapid change is we've been designing above the tool layer and we've been teaching above the tool layer. And those are portable skill sets and those are patterns that if we change or as the things that sit below change, it's akin to if you had to stop using Teams and had to move to Slack, you figured out where the buttons are and you apply the way that your team works and you get on down the road. And so that's one of the key takeaways that I just wanted to leave before we get out of here.
Thank you. Yeah, there's this idea of behaviors that sits above the tool training, and I appreciate how we really think about that here at Tier 1 and as we think about super user behaviors and the things that we need to do that are above any type of tool rollout. So I definitely appreciate that. Harrison.
I'm gonna summon my internal auctioneer here and talk really, really, really fast. Org design and org effectiveness are not new concepts. The only difference here is that AI makes them not optional right now. It's really our goal and our mission to slay ambiguity within the organization, to make the implicit explicit by classifying work, defining roles, and defining accountabilities.
slay ambiguity. I mean, I think that is the most amazing phrase I've heard all day. I appreciate that. And I appreciate that perspective in general. If you're interested, I do want to call out for the folks here. We'd love to serve as your thought partner as you continue exploring any of this work. So please do don't hesitate to reach out to us and talk to us about any of these ideas. And we'd love to talk more. I'm speaking on behalf of Harrison and Emmanuel myself. But and just thank you so much for the time and opportunity to be with you. And I want to go to one final screen here. I just want to make sure that we think about these three questions. And I would be remiss to say that we happen to be right in the middle of the World Cup here in North America. As a former college soccer player, it's constantly on my mind. And I was thinking about this the other day, and I think there's actually a pretty fitting parallel with us. And bear with me for 30 seconds, but every team out there right now has access to the same soccer ball, this brand new soccer ball that they introduced for this cup, and the same rules and the same field, and everything applies. But as you look at the different teams that are kind of unfolding, and I've been studying them pretty closely, what separates the ones that win isn't necessarily the talent alone. It's just not. It's how intentionally they've designed how their work is done together as a group, and who sets up the play, who finishes it, who's accountable for what. And I really think like part of what we've been talking about today is AI is the same way. Every organization is getting access to the tools at a rapid clip, you know. And what separates the ones that we believe that transform from the ones that just experiment and that live in that experimentation phase is whether they've intentionally designed how people and AI work together. So I do want to leave you with this thought. So ask yourself these three questions and your teams, really. Where is work still designed for humans only? And really think about that and propose that question. Where is accountability unclear? And what are expectations undefined? Where are those? And so those three questions will tell you exactly where to start these discussions in your own communities. And with that, I just want to say thank you so much, Jen, Emmanuel, Harrison. This was a fantastic conversation. Anytime I can talk to all three of you, it's very exciting for me, and I appreciate the opportunity to do that today in front of others. And thanks to all of you for joining us in the chat. We'll follow up with the recording and slides, and please do not hesitate to reach out if you want to keep the conversation going. And we really appreciate the time that you've joined with us today. So thank you so much, Jen, Manuel, Harrison. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaron. Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
me.
All right. Take care, everyone.